welcome back to another edition of the Scorching Hot Podcast. My name is Dylan Delaney. Thank you for tuning in today. Obviously, NBA free agency is now underway. A huge flurry of moves came in last night during day one of free agency, and more moves are coming in today. Obviously, some big names still haven't signed yet, but I think it's appropriate that we take the time out to look at some of the big winners so far from this free agency and take a look at what's going on in the Atlantic Division in the NBA right now, because there has been a ton of moves in the Atlantic Division. So, without further ado, let's look right into that. Starting off with the Brooklyn Nets being able to land both Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, headlining that free agent crew that is now coming in to Brooklyn and play at the Barclays Center. Obviously, what else can you say really about Kyrie and Kevin Durant, two of the best players at their respective positions? Obviously, Kyrie's coming off a tumultuous season with the Boston Celtics, but you can't really doubt him. He's one of the best point guards in the NBA, and it's going to be interesting to see how he does with this young crew in Brooklyn, similar to how he handled the young crew in Boston. It's very similar situation. His star player that he has won't be there for the first year that he's there, and he's got to manage another young cast. I think this Nets team is a little bit different, though. He's not going to have to worry about sharing a ton of shots with a ton of different players. I think as far as with the Celtics, you had Hayward, and you had, or in his first year, you had Brown, and you had Tatum, and you had a bunch of other guys. Nets don't really have a whole bunch of scorers alongside. I mean, Karis LeVert and Spencer Dinwiddie are pretty good scorers, but other than that, they just have a more or less role players that kind of fit in, or role players and prospects that fit in and do their job both defensively and offensively, and aren't primary scorers. LeVert and Dinwiddie are probably going to be like the couple of options down the road for the Nets as far as scoring goes, but Kyrie will be that number one option on this team. And they also were able to manage to bring in DeAndre Jordan, who's going to join them on the squad this year, and Garrett Temple, who's going to be an important three-point shooter and score another chance for 3-and-D guy off the bench. DeAndre Jordan's going to be able to go right next to Jarrett Allen. I don't know if they're planning on starting both of them, but that's the one thing that worries me about the DeAndre Jordan deal. It's a little bit long, and that I don't know if he's gonna stunt Jarrett Allen's development, but it does give the Nets another rim protector to go along with Allen, so it's gonna be a little bit of a fearsome front court, I guess you could say, defensively. And obviously with Kevin Durant coming into, it's Kevin Durant. We don't know how he's gonna be after his Achilles injury, but we're still gonna expect great things from him. As far as when he recovers, he might not be, might not return to his old self right away, but even a slightly worse Kevin Durant version of himself is going to be very, very good. So the Nets might not be serious contenders this year, but next year, I think a lot of people are going to expect them to take another step forward and do really good things down the line. So that's really what the Nets. They're going to probably be a very good team next year with Kyrie Irving leading the way. And his old team, the Boston Celtics, did find his replacement in Kemba Walker. We all know what he did down in Charlotte. He took that team. He tried to make them a contender by himself. It wasn't really working. He wasn't getting any help. And now he finds a new home in Boston next to guys like Gordon Hayward, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. It's going to be a very interesting season down in Boston because they don't have Al Horford anymore. They instead brought in Enes Kanter to replace him after Horford signed with a different team. We'll talk about in a second. But Kanter obviously isn't a defensive upgrade by any means, but he will be able to give them buckets in the post, and it's still going to be an upgrade over guys like Daniel Tice and Robert Williams, who aren't really ideal players that you want to start at the center position. But Kyrie Irving should be the number one option on this Celtics team with the money that they are paying him to be there, alongside Tatum, who I think, and Hayward, who probably will fill in as the next scoring options right next to him. The one thing that's probably hurts the Celtics team is that they don't have as much depth as they did last year. They do have Marcus Smart and Daniel Tice still, and I don't know if they're planning on using Gordon Hayward in the starting lineup or off the bench, but you're also losing guys like Terry Rozier, who signed with Charlotte, and as well as Marcus Morris, who's probably not coming back next year, and other smaller role players such as Brad Wanamaker, who they were announced as well to create room to sign Kemba. But that's really the only thing I think that Boston probably needs the most is just depth at these positions because really right now they just have a bunch of rookies coming off the bench like Langford, Grant Williams, and Carson Edwards. So if they can go out and sign a couple of veterans to come off their bench, I think they'll be in great shape, arguably even maybe better shape than they were in last year. Um, so it's still gonna there's still a very promising season ahead in Boston. We'll have to wait and see what happens with Toronto to see if they're gonna be the favorites or not. We'll have to wait and see because another team in the East might now be the favorites, and that could be the Philadelphia 76ers after re-signing Tobias Harris to maybe a little bit of an overpaid contract, 5 years, 178 million. I think it was important that they either got him or Jimmy Butler back, and with Jimmy Butler likely going to the Heat in return for Josh Richardson, Tobias Harris is going to be the one that they chose to give that max contract to. And with this Jimmy Butler trade, it's interesting that they well, it's not finalized yet, but it's more than likely going to happen. And with Josh Richardson coming back to the Heat, or to the 76ers, I should say, he gives them, I'd say, a younger but slightly worse Jimmy Butler in return, really. I mean, he's a good 3-and-D player. He was given much bigger scoring role last year in Miami with the Heat alongside Dwayne Wade and some of their younger options out there. And he'll get you stops on the defensive end, get you some buckets. He's obviously not as good as Jimmy Butler, but if there's someone that you want to replace Butler with, he's a pretty good guy to replace. Especially losing J.J. Redick, it's important that they get a shooter back in return, and then that can be their guy right there in Josh Richardson. So bringing in Richardson is going to be huge for them. They also re-signed Mike Scott, and they were able to sign Al Horford to be their new power forward, which is intriguing because he's been a center for most of his career, but it was believed around the league that he wanted to go back to his power forward position, which he originally was when he first came into the NBA. So bringing in Horford to come back and be that power forward is going to be interesting. You know, he was most notable to be a Joel Embiid stopper while he was in Boston. That was one of his traits, and now they bring him into Philadelphia to pair next to Embiid, and now at that power forward position that he's coveting. So it's going to be interesting to see how Philly is. Similar to the Celtics, they don't really have a ton of depth right now. I mean, they got guys like Mike Scott who re-signed, Jonah Bolden, T.J. McConnell off the top of my head, and they did get rid of Jonathan Simmons, so they don't have him anymore, but they still have that young wing in Zaire Smith, who could play a bigger role next year. So it's similar to the Celtics, they could be searching for guys who are willing to take big pay cuts, maybe veteran minimums, or just straight up shorter deals in search of hopefully a championship. I mean, this team is it's going to be very talented. It's not really the best shooting team, so maybe they might want to look for some more shooting, but it's still going to be a very competitive team. That's going to be in the East. And I think there's only really one more team that we have to talk about in this Atlantic Division because Kawhi, we don't know what's going on with him yet. He hasn't given any sort of indication where he's going. But one team that he's certainly not going to is the New York Knicks. So we have to talk about what they're doing because they are throwing a lot of money at a lot of different players. Just going down the list here, we have Julius Randle, Taj Gibson, Bobby Portis, Reggie Bullock, Wayne Ellington, and Elfrid Payton. It's a very interesting group of veterans that they're bringing in, but the one thing I can say that's positive about this entire group is that, one, actually, Julius Randle is a very good young player. He's definitely worth the contract that they gave him, and it's going to be interesting to see how he plays next to RJ Barrett because I think those will be the two guys that they can actually build around, along with, you know, your secondary pieces like Mitchell Robinson and Alonzo Trier and Kevin Knox. But a lot of these deals that they're giving out are 2-year deals, so they're really prepping for this 2021 free agency class. I believe it's headlined by Giannis Antetokounmpo, if I'm not mistaken, and probably other players within that draft class, or similar to that draft class, I should say. So definitely they're going to be prepping up big money because you can see Bullock had a 2-year deal, Ellington had a 2-year deal. I think Gibson and Portis and Payton all had other 2-year deals as well. So it looks like they're going to be, I guess, competitive, but they won't probably make a whole lot of noise. They got a lot of veterans, obviously, now next to that young group, so they'll have like a decent roster, but they won't probably make any sort of playoff like appearances or any noise like that. That's really all you can really say about it. It's just a lot of questioning moves. They had to spend their cap somehow, some way, and instead of being able to land a guy like Kevin Durant, who apparently they refused to give the max contract, or Kyrie Irving. They instead just to attempt to go for depth and fill out their roster, which isn't terrible, but I believe a lot of majority of Knick fans aren't really excited about these moves. It's nothing that puts them in sort of any sort of contention for anything, and they just look like they're just gonna be another run of the mill team in the Eastern Conference, which there's a lot of teams kind of like that. So that's what's really going on in New York. I mean, if they can land someone in the 2001 class, or 2021 class, I should say, then it's all worth it. But as of right now, it's kind of a little bit of a disappointing effort for the Knicks. So some other big winners that I got a couple of other teams that definitely I think are doing a really good job. One of those is at the Indiana Pacers. Obviously, they did lose a lot of key guys, 2 point guards in Corey Joseph and Darren Collison, who retired straight out of nowhere, and then losing Bojan Bogdanovic to the Utah Jazz, and losing Thaddeus Young to the Central Division rival Bulls. But who they were able to come in and replace those guys with is very impressive. Obviously, drafting Goga Bitadze from overseas with their first round pick. He's probably going to be backing up Miles Turner and Domantas Sabonis this year in Indiana. Probably won't see a whole ton of action. And then the guys who they were able to sign, Malcolm Brogdon coming in, probably being their new starting point guard, and putting him next to, when he comes back from injury, Victor Oladipo, is a huge addition for them. If I'm not mistaken, he either was or he was very close to being a 50-40-90 guy in the past, which is something that a lot of guards really strive to be. That's just showing massive levels of efficiency. He's a really smart player too, and he's really good on the defensive end as well. And if they can plug him right next to Victor Oladipo, then that's gonna be a really, really good backcourt right there. And they also opted to sign Jeremy Lamb away from Charlotte, and they also traded before the draft for T.J. Warren from Phoenix for essentially nothing, because who knows what's really going on in the Phoenix Suns front office as a Suns fan. So when you look at that, they lose Bogdanovic, who was their leading scorer after Victor Oladipo went down with that injury, but they bring in T.J. Warren, who was a 20-point, who has shown the capacity and the capability to be a 20-point per game scorer while he was in Phoenix for a little while. And you bring in Jeremy Lamb, who was Kemba Walker's sidekick, I guess, but has shown that he can be a pretty good wing player, gets you some threes and gets you some defensive stops as well. He's a pretty productive player, and he'll probably be a really nice addition, one of the first players coming off the bench in Indiana. So honestly, the Pacers, to me, look like they could be one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference next year. I could see them being one of the top 3 best teams in the Eastern Conference if Kawhi leaves. Even if he stays, they could. Who knows? They could be better than the Celtics or the Sixers or the Bucks. Who knows? You never know really what's going to happen in the NBA. Especially when Oladipo comes back, that team is going to have a really good core rotation with, Brogdon, Lamb, Warren, joining guys like Oladipo, who, like I said, is going to come back from injury eventually. Domantas Sabonis, Miles Turner. That's a really good core that they're working right there. So they need the Pacers, in my opinion, one of the top winners right now of this free agency class. And the team that actually signed Bogdanovic, the Jazz, I think is another really big winner right now. Being able to trade for Mike Conley, giving up a little bit of depth, but then getting it all back by signing Bogdanovic to that big deal. And they did lose Derek Favors in free agency, but they were able to sign, I should say, Ed Davis away from the Brooklyn Nets, which is another, I think, really underrated signing, because he's shown that he can be one of the better, or one of the more low-key rebounders and defenders in the league. He's kind of small for his size, but when backing up Rudy Gobert, I believe he was averaging some sort of like 8 rebounds and 8 points a game, which, I mean, from a backup center, that's pretty good stats right there. You can't really deny that. He's a pretty good rim protector. He's going to be able to do a good job backing up Gobert, like I said, and I think that's a really good signing. And then Bogdanovic, along with Joe Ingles, Royce O'Neal, Donovan Mitchell, gives the Jazz a lot of different wing players that can come out and produce every single night. I don't know if I'm assuming they're going to plan on plugging him in right next to Mitchell in that starting lineup. So that Jazz team looks like it's going to be very, very scary next year, I guess. They do have a lot of depth at that wing. They just look like a really good team across the board. And obviously with defensive head coach Quinn Snyder, they're going to be a really good defensive team again. So Wouldn't surprise me if they made a little bit more noise this year than they did in the past. In the past they haven't been able to make it out of the second round, and who knows how long. Maybe this is the year they make it all the way to the Western Conference Finals, maybe even further. It's a really good team out in Utah. They're going to make a lot of noise this year. Another team who is looking to make a lot of noise this year is the Portland Trailblazers after trading for Hassan Whiteside to play center while Jusuf Nurkic is going to be on the sidelines, which is kind of a interesting move, I guess, getting rid of both Myers Leonard and Maurice Harkless. I think Harkless played really well for them down the stretch, and so did Leonard. So it's kind of interesting to see both let those two go, as well as Alfred Camino. But they were able to re-sign Ronnie Hood as well as sign Mario Hezonja to a 2-year veteran minimum, which is I think is a pretty good deal. You never really know. Hezonja could come out and play really well. They're taking a flyer on him, and Hood proved in the postseason that he still has the capability to come off the bench and be a surefire scoring option for them. Mix that with the drafting of Nasir Little in the first round, and the Blazers look like they're gonna be really good. And you can't forget about Ken Bazemore too. They just traded for Bazemore. They traded away Evan Turner for him, so he's another wing player who I'm assuming might come into that starting lineup and replace Mo Harkless. So that Blazers team looks like it could make it to the Western Conference Finals again for a second consecutive year. They look really strong, and especially if they get Nurkic back sometime this year as well, could be really good later on in this season. So that's another team that I think is doing a really good job right now. Just a couple more teams. The New Orleans Pelicans, obviously cashing in with that Anthony Davis trade, have a ton of assets and a ton of young players, but they were able to also secure some veteran deals in Derek Favors and JJ Redick, which is really huge. And a fun little tidbit about JJ Redick. JJ Redick has never missed the playoffs in his 13-year career. So I think it's only I think it's safe to say, to go on the record, that the Pelicans are making the playoffs this year. Obviously with that type of logic. But all jokes aside, JJ Redick's going to be able to come off of that bench because I'm assuming that they're going to have Lonzo Ball and Drew Holiday start as the backcourt. As Holiday's has been playing a lot of shooting guard in his recent years. They're going to that's a deadly three-point shooter coming off the bench, which is something that they really needed, comparing with all the players that they've been getting, such as Zion and Ingram, Lonzo. It's imperative that they got a shooter, and they were able to secure one of the best ones in JJ Redick, and then also getting Derek Favors to play probably back up to Zion, be a mentor to him, teach him new things. The Pelicans they just look like they have a ton of depth at every single position right now. From head to toe, they have depth everywhere. Josh Hart might be the third option off the bench at shooting guard. I mean, for most teams, he might be in consideration for a starting spot, but he might be the third string shooting guard, which is insane to think about. So the Pelicans, David Griffin's doing a great job with taking this team and rebuilding it, especially with the draft after getting guys like, obviously Zion, but, Jackson Hayes and Nickeil Alexander-Walker out of Virginia Tech, and then signing Favors and Redick, getting Lonzo, getting Ingram, getting Hart, and a bunch of assets in the future. The Pelicans are going to be a very, very good team very soon, in my opinion. I can definitely see them back in the playoff hunt next year, and it's crazy how much one player can dictate the future of an entire team, and it really looks like the Pelicans are going to be coming out strong after this Anthony Davis saga has ended. After the Pelicans, the Sacramento Kings look like they're trying to embellish a winning culture, giving big money to guys like Harrison Barnes for that extension, who's, he didn't play bad when he went to Sacramento, but he does give them like a stable scoring option at the small forward position. Dwayne Dedmon's likely to be their new center. It looks like they might be moved. It looks like they've renounced Willie Cauley-Stein and they moved on from him. So Dwayne Dedmon looks like he's going to be the new center there, who's a pretty good option. He's been a pretty underrated center during the time in Atlanta, and now he gets his big payday to go play in Sacramento alongside Marvin Bagley. They also did sign Trevor Ariza to a 2-year deal, and they signed Corey Joseph to a 3-year deal to back up De'Aaron Fox. So they were able to secure deals with a lot of different veterans who look like, and the Kings look like they're serious about playoff contention. They missed it by a couple of games this year, and they surprised a lot of people with how they played. Preferably with De'Aaron Fox and Buddy Hield taking big steps forward, and Marvin Bagley is sure to take another huge step in his sophomore year. I think They have a really good young core to build around, and they have a lot of veterans who they're going to put next to them. This could be another squad that improves a lot next year. They could very well be in the playoff hunt as well, and would finally end a playoff drought in Sacramento that's been there for a very long time. So it's going to be fun to watch them play next year alongside with all the young guys and the veterans and see how they all merge together. And I think that they're doing a really good job in Sacramento. You know, not trying to go after a big name superstar because they were linked to Vucevic, but rather fill out the rest of their roster, get more depth, and then compete next year and see where that takes them. And just one more team, I guess, to talk about is the Golden State Warriors with this whole D'Angelo Russell saga. Obviously, losing Kevin Durant in free agency is going to hurt them. But getting D'Angelo Russell back in return is something that's very interesting because I don't think that he's going to be staying on the team much longer. I think that they're going to look to find a trade partner for him. I think that the sign and trade was just a big way for them to get something in return for losing Durant. You know, obviously you don't want to lose your best player for nothing, and I think that they just did that so that way they could take Russell and try to flip him and maybe get some sort of asset in return. Obviously, Russell's going to have a very big contract now, too, with that $141 million that they gave to him, and it's going to be tough to find suitors, I think, for that because not a lot of teams right now that are in sort of contention are looking for a point guard, but one team that I do know that has been linked to Russell a lot is the Minnesota Timberwolves. Obviously, the Warriors would have to take a contract back like Jeff Teague or a Andrew Wiggins, who's got a massive contract as well. But that's one team I know was extremely linked to D'Lo as well as the Suns. But I don't think the Suns have a really need for him after signing Ricky Rubio, who just very quickly, who I think at first I didn't like the signing at all, but looking more into it, I think it's a really good signing. It might have been a little bit more overpaid for him, but I think that it's good that the Suns finally got a point guard, and they, now they just have to re-sign Kelly Oubre, and I think that they'll be a pretty competitive team next year. But back to D'Angelo Russell, I don't think that he's going to be on the Warriors much longer because it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to put him with Curry in the backcourt. That just spells defensive nightmares for me. I mean, that's a backcourt that could easily drop 50 points a game for you. And if they do consider keeping him, that means Klay Thompson, I'm assuming, would move to the 3, which makes for a pretty small lineup, especially when you consider Draymond Green's going to be out there too, and they don't have a center. So it wouldn't shock me if they sent D'Angelo Russell away in a package for some more depth, because right now the Warriors have absolutely zero depth on their roster. I think that some of the only other players they even have are like Alfonso McKinney, Jacob Evans, maybe Sean Livingston if they decide to pick up his option and bring him back. And unless they're plan on bringing back like Andrews Biedrins from the dead or someone from the We Believe era, they don't have anybody else on their roster. And it's also depending on what Quinn Cook and Kevon Looney do as free agents as well. So the Warriors could opt to maybe trade him for some depth for a team that's maybe willing to give up some of their veterans. We'll have to wait and see. We haven't seen any really links from any other teams other than the Timberwolves for free agent interest, as well as like the Suns and the Knicks. But as far as trade suitors go, we haven't heard anything on that front, but we have heard that the Warriors are looking to deal him. So yeah, that's gonna really do it for this free agency roundup, I guess, for the first basically day now. Thanks for listening. Hopefully there's going to be a lot more free agent news coming up that we can break down and discuss. I'm slated to be on another podcast with one of my buddies from school the next week. And I've also recently collabed with another website, Tailgate Sports. I'm going to be doing some content for them, and we're going to be also putting some content up on my website, Hot Streak Sports. So make sure you go check both those websites out. And yeah, like I said, it's going to do it for us today. Thank you for listening. Like, comment, share, subscribe on this. Any and all support is appreciated. And like I said, go check out those links in the description to Tailgate and Hot Streak Sports as well. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Scorching Hot Podcast today, and we will see you next time.